In this tutorial, I want to show you how to create a web page based on a parameter passed in a URL. So in this case, this page is passed two parameters. The parameters are cat equals 5, which is my category ID, and item in this case equals 3, which is the item that I'm going to retrieve from my database. So I'm going to use these two parameters to construct queries to write out all of the data that you see in the body of this page. So let's start with a basic PHP page which does not connect to the database and does not use the parameters. So in this case, I'm going to go, and this is my basic page that I'm going to start with. I've got everything hard-coded in this page, and instead I'm going to actually use data from the database to construct this page. So let's look at my PHP page. I'm starting with a basic PHP page that only is using three PHP include files to create the structure of my page, but the data within the body of the page is right now entirely hard-coded HTML. I have the name of the product here, the description here, the image name here, the category name here, and the details about each item that's in stock is hard-coded down in a table at the bottom of the page. And all of this data I want to get from the database. So to do this, the first thing I need to do is create a connection to the database. So I'm going to put $PHP to open some code, creating a code block at the top of the page. And I'm going to actually include a file that I include on every page that I connect to my database called db.inc. This file contains the connection to my database. I'm creating a MySQL connection to the database. It's on localhost. The username is XXX. Password is password, and the name of the database is test. I check to see whether I've created the connection already. If I haven't, then I create the connection to use later throughout the rest of my page. I always use an include file to connect to the database because frequently I may move my projects about, I may move my websites from my development server to my live server, and sometimes those database connections can change. I also like to update my database password frequently, and I want to make sure that I have it in an include file so that I can change that password periodically to help maintain security. So once I've connected to my database, I want to write my queries. Well, actually, before I write my queries, I actually want to get the data from my URL parameter. So if I look at my web page again, the URL parameter at the top of the page that I'm going to connect to is, I have two parameters, cat and items. So they're both appearing in the URL. And in order to get a parameter out of a URL, I want to use the auto global $_get, and I put in the parameter name. So for the first parameter, it's cat. So that's getting the parameter, but I want to assign it to a variable, so I'm going to do $cat equals get cat. I'm going to create a second variable, $item equals $_get item. So that will retrieve the two parameters from the URL, and I can now use those parameters in my query. I'm going to look up the category name. So I'm going to select star from category, where cat ID is like the cat variable I just retrieved. And then I'm going to want to run that query. So I'm going to create a result set, rs. I'm going to use the connection to run the query in an object-oriented mode. And if the query fails, I'm going to actually terminate execution of my page and display an error message. Once I run the query, I want to get the associative array containing my results, which is fetch assoc. That's going to get essentially the first line from my query, or the first row. This query actually only returns one row, so I'm not going to loop through the data. Instead, I'm just going to use that row and I'm going to put in the name of my category name field, cat name, and that's going to get the category name from my first query. I'm now done with this query, so I'm ready to write a second query. Now I don't like typing, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste it, and the second I'm going to just edit it to create my second query. So in the next query I'm going to select star from item, where my item is like my item variable. And this is not, this is actually a variable, so it's going to be item ID equals item. So there's my item ID, and I'm going to run this query again on my results set. I'm going to change, if I have an error here, I want to know that it's query 2 that failed. So I'm going to change my error message. I'm going to fetch an associative array again, and in this case I'm going to display that all of the data from this row. So I want my item name, which would be item name, and then I want another variable. I'm going to call it image equals, let's hit image. So that's a full-sized image associated with the item. I'm going to create another variable called idesc equals $row itemdesc for item description. And so I think that's all the data I need out of my query for the item. Once I've gotten this data, I actually want to create a title for this page. And actually, I want the title to be in the heading. So I'm actually going to put this in. I'm going to move my required files below this, because I've opened my headings, and in my required files I close my headings. So I'm going to actually write out a title here. So the title will be for the whole page, a title for the page. So I'm going to go like this, title. So the title tag, I'm going to put in my title, I'm going to have my item name, $I name, dot, and I'm going to put in colon space, and then I'm going to write out my category name, dot. So I'm writing that out, and now I'm going to put the rest of the variables in where I had my previous data written. So I'm going to take my category name, I'm just going to copy the variable, copy, and I'm going to write it in space in place of the words women's clothing here. And then I'm going to take my item name, I'm going to find the name of the item in my page, and it's called hiking shorts, so I'm going to put that there. I'm going to take the name of my image. Oops, now I have written these things in, but they're not in PHP tags, so I need to go question mark PHP CHO semicolon question mark. So I'm going to echo the category name there, and I'm going to right there. I'm going to, I'll just copy this whole thing. Oh, let me not forget my semicolon before I start copying it. Let me copy this little echo statement here. I'm going to echo my item description. DESC, and I'm going to write out my image. So IMG. So now I've echoed out all of the data at the top half of my page, and if I save my page and then I look at my sample page here and I reload it, item 3 is actually Airstream Canvas shoes. I get the top part of my page is now filled in, but I haven't started writing out my order items table. And if I change my parameter to something else, like the number 2, you can see that the content of the page changes. So now I want to create my final query on my database. And this query is going to get the inventory data from the inventory table for the item that was selected. So what I'm going to do is, in order to do that, I'm going to go back up and I'm going to copy one of my previous queries. I'm going to go down here and I'm going to place this query right before the row that I want to write out multiple times, one for each item in my database. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this query, and this query, instead of querying my item table, I am going to query the inventory table. Where item ID equals item, and I'm actually going to also add and cat ID equals, and again my category variable. I'm going to fetch an associative array, but this particular query is going to return multiple items, so I'm going to put this in a while loop. Then get rid of the semicolon, and then I have the curly braces. Inside this while loop, I'm going to want to write out this row multiple times. So I'm going to echo, put this in double quotes, change any double quotes inside my double quotes to single quotes so they will write out, and in my double quotes put a semicolon there. I'm going to write out my there. So my colors are right. I have an extra semicolon. Okay, so I'm writing out this row, and then what I'm going to want to do is, inside the while loop, I'm going to want to create my variables, or each column associated with this inventory table. I have 4 variables: size, color, price, and the quantity on hand. And the quantity on hand is the amount I have in inventory. And so now I'm going to want to take each one of these, copy, I'm going to write them into the page. I actually have these in a value on the radio button, so that when I select something, I can actually write a cookie that will record what the person selected from the inventory table. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to write the size here. I'm also going to write the size in a table cell. So each one of these I'm going to actually write twice. Then I'm going to take my color, write that out. And I'm going to take my price, and write that out. And I'll do something with my quantity on hand, but I'm going to wait a second and see how this works. So let's save this and refresh my browser. I reload my page. I actually have multiple rows in my table. Now there's a couple of things that are still wrong with this. First off is I wound up with my radio button at the bottom selected, and that's because every single time I loop through the loop, I have the I reset the selected property to be the most recent radio button. And the other thing I have is it is showing that every single thing is in stock. I have to check the quantity on hand, and if the quantity on hand is greater than 0, it's in stock. Otherwise, it's not in stock. So let's look at my thing. So first I want to see, I'm hard coding this checked equals checked into my radio button. And so instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have an if statement, and I want to determine if it's the first time through my loop, I want to write out the checked parameter. If not, I don't want it to be checked. So I'm going to actually create a counter here, up here, equals 0. And then I'm going to go here if counter, $counter. Then I'm going to echo this line. Else, I'm going to just echo exactly the same line without the checked parameter set. Also, I don't want to hard code this value of yes in here. And I'm going to check to see if the quantity on hand is greater than 0. And if it is, I'm going to echo yes. Otherwise, I'm going to echo no. Save it, and let's see how this works. I reload it. I have an error on line 73. Quality on hand. Oh, I called it QUAN instead. So let's call the right variable, and let's try this again. So this is correct, but for some reason I'm still getting this on the bottom. Oh, I forgot to increment my counter. So once I do this, I actually have to increment my counter, otherwise it's always 0. Now, if I do this, I have only the first radio button checked. I show that at least one of my products is not in stock, and so now I've created a page that reads a parameter, and if you change the item, all of the details on the page